Good evening again, everyone. This is the public event Venezuela and its Future, the December 6 elections. It's hosted by the Venezuela Peace and Solidarity Committee of Vancouver, with committee member organizations the Vancouver Peace Council, Just Peace Committee, and Frente Hugo Chavez, the Hugo Chavez People's Defense Front, Southwest BC. This public forum is held in anticipation of the next national elections in Bolivarian Venezuela and the likelihood of US imperialist interference and propaganda against the process and the Bolivarian project. We want to build solidarity with the people and the Bolivarian revolution. We particularly stand by the sovereignty and democracy of Bolivarian Venezuela. We say no foreign interference or reactionary shenanigans. On December 6th, let the people decide. What is the Venezuela Peace and Solidarity Committee of Vancouver? I'm Barbara Waldern of the Just Peace Committee, one of the founding members. The Venezuela Peace and Solidarity Committee was established at a meeting of several groups on January 31st, 2019. A political solidarity and education organization. The basis for establishing it was to counter the US-led imperialist misinformation about the elections process in Venezuela. The US and company have persistently smeared the democratically elected Bolivarian administration. They have consistently denounced a series of valid elections, which have been monitored by international teams since Hugo Chavez was first elected. At the same time, the imperialists have encircled Venezuela militarily and threatened to march in. They assert that Maduro's election and re-election were fraudulent, while they back the imposter Juan Guaido. They have been trying to stir up mass dissent and carry out coups, but they have not been able to muster enough support so far. International solidarity surely helps. The US and reactionary Venezuelans tried to stage a coup when they attempted to enter Venezuela via Colombia with arms on February 23, 2019. Our committee organized protests, provided information, and opposed the Canadian states and Canadian media's complicity in the misinformation campaigns. Their support for reaction, especially the rogue Lima Group, and their support for interference and coup attempts. We join in calling for an end to the cruel sanctions. The US has illegally forced coercive economic measures on Venezuela to block the flow of its international revenues and trade, coercing states and corporations that attempt to carry on with normal business with Venezuela. The punishing blockade is causing a humanitarian crisis in which the people are suffering. Insanely, the US and its friends blame this crisis, which they have caused, on the Bolivarian government. Their aim is to cause pain so that the people begin to doubt and blame its government. Our committee strongly objects to the use of sanctions as a weapon to crush the people and their liberation movements. This forum is one of many ways in which the Venezuela Peace and Solidarity Committee is trying to straighten the record and give voice to the Bolivarian movement abroad. We offer support to the people and the representatives they have legitimately elected. We wish to help in clarifying the truth and fostering understanding. We work with other democratically and justice-minded people to prevent a military intervention and point to the injustices against the Venezuelan people wrought by imperialism. We want peace with social justice in the region. We call for the respect for international law and the UN Charter, and we support democratic processes and sovereignty while we agitate against interference, economic sanctions, and militarization. The Venezuela Peace and Solidarity Committee of Vancouver organizes protests, writes, and shares information and opinions, and tries to build unity in anti-imperialist solidarity and solidarity against aggression in all forms. We join in solidarity with the people of all Latin America the Caribbean, and elsewhere. A reminder to please turn off your mics and cameras through the main presentations. We will take questions later. You can write your questions in the chat box below. Our speakers today. We're pleased to feature Luis Augusto Acuña Cedeño, Chargé d'Affaires for Venezuela in Canada, as the main presenter who will talk about the elections and the Bolivarian project. Secondly, Nino Pagliccia, speaking for the Hugo Chavez People's Defense Front, will respond and argue for solidarity with the Venezuelan people and Bolivarian Revolution. Next, I, Barbara Waldern of the Just Peace Committee, will briefly talk on ending the sanctions and preventing military interventions. The Just Peace Committee is affiliated with the International League of People's Struggles. Then Kimball Cariou, representing the Vancouver Peace Council, will focus on Canada's role in hostility against Venezuela. He will explain our opposition to the Trudeau government's backing of the Lima Group and US attacks against Venezuela. Finally, Kimball will read a solidarity message from the Vancouver and District Labor Council. As we proceed with the presentations and discussions, please write your questions in the chat box. We'll try to answer all of them. Let's begin the presentations now. Professor Luis Acuña Cedeño has accreditation issued by the Government of Canada as a diplomat. He's currently the Venezuelan state's highest ranking representative in this country. A PhD graduate of the University of Western Ontario, Mr. Luis Acuña was a cabinet minister under President Hugo Chavez and served as governor of Sucre State under Nicolas Maduro. Today, he runs Venezuela's embassy in Sandy Hill, Ottawa, with the title of Chargé d'Affaires. The diplomatic mission of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela has staff working at the embassy in the city of Ottawa, the General Consulate of Montreal, the General Consulate of Vancouver, and the General Consulate of Toronto. Welcome, Mr. Luis Acuña. Please begin your presentation.
I want to thank the Venezuelan Peace and Solidarity Committee of Vancouver, the Vancouver Peace Council, the Hugo Chavez People Defense Front. And
a little louder, if you don't mind, a little louder.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Yes. I want to thank the Venezuelan Peace and Solidarity Committee of Vancouver, the Vancouver Peace Council, the Hugo Chavez People Defense Front, and the Just Peace Committee for the invitation to this webinar to talk about the elections to renew the parliament in Venezuela. This gives us the opportunity not to talk about the technical issues of an election or how many people will vote, but to explain why these elections are so important and why the National Assembly is a fundamental political institution to manage the situation in my country. First of all, we must recognize that we, the Chavistas, lost the parliamentary elections in 2015. The main reason of our failure at that time was the economic war set up by the United States against Venezuela. In the frame of this economic war, the transnational groups of food processing in Venezuela kept producing, but they modified the distribution system to induce shortage. These shortages caused long lines at the establishment. The opposition centered its campaign on the people staying on lines, and they succeed in convincing people that the ones to blame for such a situation was the Bolivarian Revolution. The opposition, and so did we, knew very well the power of the National Assembly. I myself was a parliamentarian at the National Assembly for 3 terms, from year 2000 to year 2012. At that time, 2015, we knew the real situation of the election and its possible outcome. We neither suspended it nor postponed it for later times because our constitution established that the new parliament had to be inaugurated the 5th of January of 2016. The election went on, and on December 2015, the opposition won the majority of the National Assembly. They were not alone. They were backed by the United States and some other countries. Year 2016, the National Assembly was inaugurated the 5th of January of 2016. In his opening speech, the elected president of the National Assembly said, "In 6 months, Nicolás Maduro will be out as president of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela." The main plan to overthrow Presidente Maduro was written by Kurt Tidd, the head of the US Southern Command, in February 2016, Operation Venezuela Freedom 2, which later he updated in February 2018, Master Coup to overthrow the Bolivarian Revolution. The plan was an under siege and suffocation approach to use the National Assembly as a pincer to obstruct governance in my country. It includes abrupt scenarios that combine street actions and the use of armed violence to call events and mobilization, to question the rulers, to deny credits, to repeal laws, to promote a referendum or an amendment of the constitutional text in order to register, mobilize, and organize a critical mass for the confrontation. The deputies of the opposition did transform themselves in enemies of the free Venezuela they were born in. Backed by the United States and some other countries, deputies in the National Assembly. First, they did all they could to position in the international media the metrics that Venezuela was entering in a stage of humanitarian crisis due to the lack of food, water, and medicines. They managed the scenario where Venezuela was close to collapse and imploding, demanding from the international community a humanitarian intervention. They shouted to the world that Venezuela and its government had to be held responsible of the economic stagnation, inflation, and scarcity. They accompanied Luis Almagro's plans to activate the democratic charge against Venezuela. Then, in 2016, the deputies of the National Assembly called for blocking the streets and a general civic strike, promoting demonstration with the use of armed violence as planned by Kurt Tidd. The 2017 balance of the terrorist actions led by the opposition were 131 dead, 5 of them lynched and burned alive as never seen in Venezuela. The peace came when President Nicolás Maduro called for the election of a constitutional National Assembly, which was elected with a majority of people from Chavismo. In 2017, the president of the National Assembly, Julio Borges, traveled around the world requesting more blockade against the Venezuelan people. Year 2018. Starting the year 2018, the Bolivarian Revolution was still alive. So the United States decided to go to the front line because the failure of the opposition in overthrowing the Presidente Nicolás Maduro during year 2016 and 2017. Washington intensified the most powerful weapon of the economic war, the attack on the Venezuelan currency, the Bolivar. The United States induced an hyperinflation of 130% in 2018, which in turn generated and continues to generate a deterioration in the purchasing power of the Venezuelan working class. With the coercive and unilateral actions called sanctions, the United States and the deputies promoted a fall in the national gross product. In 2018, there was also an attempt of assassination of President Nicolás Maduro, where the opposition in the National Assembly had much to do. Year 2019. The year 2018 finishes and the Bolivarian Revolution, with the help of the people, resisted the war. In 2019, the deputies of the opposition in the National Assembly decided to surrender Venezuela to the interests of the United States and try to establish a parallel government. In a plan designed by Washington in January 2019, Juan Guaidó, the president of the National Assembly, proclaimed himself president of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. The United States immediately supported this self-proclamation based on its own interpretation or misinterpretation of the Bolivarian Constitution. Washington blackmailed many countries, including the European Union, to join them in this adventure of the deputies. Washington gave Juan Guaidó the power to administer all the assets of Venezuela in the United States and in the world. Three examples. The large, rich, and important company Citgo, property of the Venezuelan, located in the United States, was stolen from us and given to Juan Guaidó. The Bank of England decided to give Juan Guaidó the Venezuelan gold we had there, worth more than $2 billion US. The government of Colombia allowed that the important and rich company of our oil industry, Monomeros, were transferred to Juan Guaidó. Many countries gave money to Juan Guaidó on the excuse of humanitarian aid for the Venezuelan abroad, but all that money went to the pockets of a few deputies. With the help of the National Assembly, the United States attempted a coup d'etat by forcing the delivery of an supposed humanitarian aid through the border with Colombia. Venezuela resisted, and that humanitarian aid of nails, weapons, and gunpowder did not enter Venezuela. The task force of the opposition in the National Assembly also caused a national blackout by intervening the national electrical system. In 2019, the deputies blackmailed the Bolivarian National Armed Forces with an amnesty law. We got to year 2020. In 2020, you know the history. They began the year by hiring mercenaries to assassinate leader of the revolution, done by the president of the National Assembly and so-called interim president. U.S. prosecutor accused Nicolás Maduro of being a narco-terrorist. By the pressure exerted by the opposition, the coercive and unilateral measures or sanctions were set to its extreme, and every day President Trump gave a turn to the ball. But after 5 years, the Bolivarian Revolution is still alive and Nicolás Maduro is ruling the country. All that because our people believe in liberty and fight every day, even in the middle of extreme necessities. And we are alive because abroad, we count on people like you, the ones who are listening to me at this moment. You also believe in liberty, and your solidarity has been our strength. The Empire and the European Union know that the opposition needs more time to accomplish the goal of overthrowing President Nicolás Maduro. They do not want elections. They argue that there are not conditions. They are asking for more time. They do not want a new National Assembly. They will pretend to keep a clown as interim president, arguing he is the president of the parliament. But this election of December will go on, so that a new parliament is inaugurated the 5th of January 2021 as established in our constitution. This is so because we, the Venezuelans, are the ones who decide. The will of the European Union or the Empire is not the one that decides. The parliamentarian election of next December is important because we need to replace these deputies that pretend to sell the liberty of the Venezuelan. We need to wipe out this opposition, and we want to do it democratically with the vote of the people. We believe in democracy, we believe in elections, Venezuela counts with one of the most reliable electoral systems in the world, which was updated technologically this year, as shown in a public presentation to the world. Venezuela invited the United Nations Organization and the European Union to watch the election. If you know any parliamentarian from this country who wants to go to watch the elections in Venezuela, please let me know. Venezuela wants to vote. Please accompany Venezuela in this election with your solidarity. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a review of the history of U.S. aims and efforts to interfere and defeat the Bolivarian movement and the democratic process in Venezuela. We're going to have a question period later. And so right now we'll proceed with another speaker. Nino Pagliccia is an activist and writer based in Vancouver. He's one of the organizers for the Hugo Chavez People's Defense Front in Vancouver, Frente para la Defensa de los Pueblos Hugo Chavez, Vancouver. The front is a founding member of the Venezuela Peace and Solidarity Committee of Vancouver. Nino Pagliccia is a Venezuelan Canadian who follows and writes about international relations with a focus on the Americas. He's a frequent contributor to the People's Voice, Global Research, Counterpunch, One World Press, and other online media. Nino is the editor of the book, Cuba, Solidarity in Canada, 5 Decades of People-to-People Foreign Relations. Take it away, Nino.
Okay, thank you, Barbara, and welcome and greetings to everyone attending this webinar. I would also like to thank Chargé d'Affaires Luis Acuña, who represents the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela in Canada, appointed by the legitimate government of Nicolas Maduro. He just reminded us of the importance of the December 6th election. Something changed on my screen. Okay. And also he focused on the fact that this is done in the spirit of democracy and sovereignty of Venezuela. Of course, this will not be accepted by a small group that is boycotting the election, knowing very well that they would lose. But the Chargé d'Affaires also reminded us of the conditions under which the 2015 National Assembly was elected and what its real mission was: to overthrow President Nicolas Maduro. Now, this is a great reminder. I remember watching this on TV, and I could see how the president of the National Assembly, sitting just next to President Maduro, told him on the face that within 6 months he would be out. That was outrageous, but that really happened. He referred also to that 2015 National Assembly, not as a legislative body debating the management of the country, but as an outlaw body that has used its majority as an obstructionist group that promoted street violence, food and medicine shortages, and a criminal economic squeeze on behalf of a foreign power until the present day. As the Chargé d'Affaires also said, Nicolas Maduro is still in power with the support of the majority of Venezuelans. Foreign powers will not decide who governs sovereign Venezuela. Venezuelans do, and they will make the right decision this time on December the 6th. So on behalf of many Venezuelans like myself, muchas gracias, Professor Acuña. Now, with those reminders, I will say a few words about solidarity with the Bolivarian Revolution and the people of Venezuela. I am a strong believer in solidarity. I really believe that solidarity is the missing link in human interaction that can lead us to peace and justice in the 21st century. Unfortunately, solidarity is a socialist human value and is not part of the foreign policies of capitalist and imperialist governments. Those governments have to be forced by deep revolutionary movements to make solidarity part of the foreign policy. We have concrete examples of solidarity in practice in Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. But look what happens. The imperial forces go into panic mode. They react as if solidarity was a pandemic and want to get rid of it by any means at the cost of human lives. So let's talk about Venezuela. Hopefully this will encourage us to strengthen our solidarity. We all know that Venezuela has been committed to carry on socialist revolution since
Nino, is there an internet interruption? Hello, Nino?
Everything okay?
Okay, continue. We lost you for a few seconds. Continue. Oh. We lost him again. We'll just wait a few seconds. Yeah, your voice is breaking up.
I am losing you too. Are we having a problem, general, for everybody?
Well, it's stable at the moment. Just try to continue. We'll see.
Yeah, I can hear your voice is breaking too. Okay, I'll try to continue. Mm-hmm. Is that okay?
Yes, please. Kimball? Yes, please.
Oh, okay, I will go on. So just to continue on the importance of the Venezuelan constitution, the protagonism of Venezuelans in the building of socialism, the Bolivarian socialism, is not just in words. Venezuelans today are involved in one of the most advanced social transformations with the development of the comunas, the communes. Now, also the reason we know that this is a developing socialist revolution is that in 2002, the US immediately attempted a coup against Chavez, only 3 years after he became president. And finally, we know that the reason this is also a popular revolution of the people, is that the people themselves put him back in power only 47 hours after the coup. You know the first thing the coup plotters did in those few hours they were in power? They annulled this constitution. That was the first action, or one of the first actions. Yes, this little book is a threat because the message in this book is incompatible with US imperial hegemony. But despite the rough beginning in Venezuela, there was an incredibly positive social development that would require a book to present it. I will only mention some examples. In our solidarity work, we can't just be critical of the actions of our opponents. We need to put a spotlight on our successes because these are socialist successes. Perhaps the most outstanding success of the Bolivarian Revolution has been having achieved by 2015 the 8 Millennium Development Goals established by the United Nations. The two most important goals out of the 8 are eradicate extreme poverty and hunger and reduce child mortality. That was achieved by the Bolivarian Revolution. Also, Venezuela has achieved incredible success in public health with free and accessible healthcare, including over 80% geographical and population coverage provided to all Venezuelans. This is thanks to the Misión Barrio Adentro, which has also been recognized by the Pan American Health Organization. Another important success was just recently announced by President Maduro that 3.2 million homes have been delivered so far, with a goal of reaching 5 million by the end of 2025 across the country. Now, aside from material successes, Venezuela has also achieved political successes. Perhaps the most remarkable is having had 24 democratic elections in 20 years. In fact, on December the 6th will be election number 25. All legitimate elections, including the 2015 election of the National Assembly that Chargé d'Affaires Luis Acuña reminded us of, where the opposition got a majority. But they want you to believe that that was the only legitimate election. Now, that does not hold water in my book. These are successes in the middle of severe hybrid war on Venezuela by the imperial forces that started in 2014 or 2015. Let's not be fooled. The US is not just wishing for regime change in Venezuela. It is waging a war on Venezuela. Instead of dropping real bombs, this war by the US and its cronies, including Canada, has dropped more than 300 unilateral coercive measures. They are just as deadly. Thousands of Venezuelans have died as a consequence of the critical shortages of medical supplies caused by the so-called sanctions. Instead of launching cluster bombs, this hybrid war has launched clusters of corporate media misinformation demonizing the Bolivarian government. Instead of sending armies, this war sends foreign mercenaries with the aid of local traders. Instead of declaring a conventional war, this hybrid war carries out a unilateral illegal onslaught that creates sectarian divisions, rebellion, poverty, and violence in order to create the appearance of international conflict in Venezuela. So yes, the hybrid war is causing damage on many innocent civilians who are becoming casualties in Venezuela. But Venezuela is resisting, is defending itself, and is winning one battle at a time. Nicolas Maduro, we were just reminded, is still in power. But let me tell you what I see as the future of the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela. First of all, I see Venezuela maintaining its Bolivarian Revolution with sovereignty, independence, and dignity despite of the obstacles. I see Venezuela committed to a democratic and constitutional process despite the US politicized misinformation. Maintaining the election of the National Assembly on December 6th is a statement of that commitment. Venezuelans will elect a new National Assembly. I see Venezuela determined to engage all Venezuelans in the political process, including those who do not share the same political views. I also see Venezuela continuing to call for peace and dialogue. Peace is not submission. Peace is not surrender. Peace is life. In order to see this future in Venezuela, I would like to remind us ourselves that we need to strengthen our solidarity with Venezuela and the people of Venezuela by challenging our own Canadian government and its misguided foreign policy. The single most critical tool for that is to be informed. We need to be armed with the truth in order to counter the info war waged against Venezuela. There are many sources of reliable information about Venezuela, and they are all accessible online. Let's tap into it. We can start by getting in touch with the organizations sponsoring this event. This is the right time to begin and show Venezuela that's not alone. Thank you. Venceremos.
Venceremos.
Okay.
Thank you, Nino. All right, you're going to introduce me? Go ahead.
Yes, I will do that with pleasure. Now I'm happy to introduce our next speaker, Barbara Waldern. With a background in linguistics and social science, Barbara Waldern is an educator and longtime anti-imperialist activist working mainly on causes related to just peace and international solidarity. So Barbara, you have the virtual floor.
Okay, thank you. Yes, and thanks for reminding us of all the things for which there is a sincere desire for unity in building solidarity to defend the democratic, social, and economic advances of Bolivarian Venezuela, and to defend the interests and help the people of Venezuela, who we know deserve our solidarity. They deserve a democratic government and a socially minded government that cares about the people, and that their real enemy and obstacle is not the society they have at present, but the onslaught by US-led imperialism. So I want to add a few words about building solidarity myself. As you pointed out, it's and our main speaker, Luisa Acuña, pointed out, it's been very important in breaking through the misinformation and helping the Bolivarian state stay intact and keep going forward. My first concern is opposing wars of aggression and counter-revolution. The US has been refining and extending multi-pronged tactics of waging wars more and more by proxies and many unconventional means in this era. The main objectives are the same as ever: to stop socialism or communism and stop liberation movements in general, to maintain its hegemony. Having adopted the so-called neoliberal policy since the 80s, it sees any state or movement straying from this path as a threat to monopoly capitalism. It has been the gendarme defending that system, though recently it has been delegating more of that work to its allies, such as Canada, Israel, Turkey, Colombia, and others. It's been using communications technology and digitalized weaponry, including cyber warfare and drones, while it increases the capacity of warheads and military transportation. The US and its allies abuse the media and social networking to wrangle, buy, or coerce cooperation. It partners with the worst reaction and terrorist elements. It also uses deceit. Coercive economic measures comprise another arsenal. The aims are to hurt the people, cause chaos, and destabilize the domestic situation, to either force the state to give in or inspire counter-revolution. This would prepare for an easy military mobilization or dispense with the need for a military intervention entirely. We should understand the keen interest in destroying the Venezuelan and other revolutions in this context. The deepening economic crisis and the crisis of the US state in particular are creating more tensions and sharpening rivalries. While it's true its status and abilities are weakening, the wounded hound naturally responds with greater ferocity to the bleeding and to the constraints. The danger of all-out war on a global scale is looming. The Venezuela Peace and Solidarity Committee of Vancouver has been discussing the context of the attacks on Venezuela as much as the details of the US-Venezuela relations. In our estimation, the solidarity work can greatly assist the defense of the people and the Bolivarian Revolution. Our solidarity can help chisel out the truth and lend credibility. It can help the people advance and overcome the present challenges. Our work, moreover, can assist in the mass international opposition to a military intervention in Venezuela and other sovereign democratic nations. Anti-war struggle is thus a pillar of our solidarity work. The other pillar is opposition to the so-called economic sanctions, another form of aggression. Now we take time for Kimball Cariou to talk about the Canadian government's role. We want to highlight the context of Canadian as a solidarity movement in Canada. The government is an imperialist state in support of the US strategy. Kimball Cariou is the former editor of the People's Voice and a leading member and BC elections candidate for the Communist Party of Canada. He's speaking tonight on behalf of the Vancouver Peace Council, which is another founding member of the Venezuela Peace and Solidarity Committee of Vancouver. Over to you, Kimball.
Thank you, Barbara. And when I'm finished, I'll also read out a solidarity statement from the Vancouver and District Labor Council. I want to say a few words tonight about the role of Canada in this sordid affair of imperialist intervention against Venezuela. Remember that this is a country with which Canada established diplomatic relations in 1948. That's a long time to have diplomatic relations with another country, a country which has never violated the interests of Canada, which has never condemned Canada in international affairs, never done anything to harm Canadians. And yet we have a government which is seemingly fixated on trying to undermine the sovereignty of the people of Venezuela, undermine their right to conduct their democratic elections, to conduct their affairs in the world in a sovereign way. We remember that 2 months ago, the foreign minister of Venezuela said this. He said that nearly 2 years ago, the Trudeau government threw their wholehearted support behind a US-backed plan to declare an opposition politician, Juan Guaido, as interim president. He said that since then, the Trump administration has orchestrated numerous coup attempts and appealed for an army mutiny against Nicolas Maduro. It has adopted extreme unilateral coercive economic measures against Venezuela. And the Canadian government has joined in sanctioning Venezuelan officials and building up an oppositional international coalition. Absolutely unprecedented to behave this way in international affairs. And in my remarks, I want to credit foreign policy analyst Yves Engler, who's done a lot of research on this question of Canada's approach to Venezuela. He wrote recently that Justin Trudeau has a total obsession with Venezuela. And sometimes after Justin Trudeau became prime minister, we tended to think maybe it was Chrystia Freeland, who was the foreign affairs minister at the time. Maybe it was Freeland who was directing the show. But things haven't changed with the new foreign minister, François-Philippe Champagne. It's clearly Trudeau who's doing this. This is a man who has continually raised the so-called situation in Venezuela during calls with other world leaders. Most recently in a call he made with Chilean President Sebastián Piñera, who himself has faced huge protests over his right-wing policies and human rights violations. On many other occasions, Trudeau has discussed Venezuela with the presidents of other countries across the Western Hemisphere. He's gone beyond that. He's made this an important issue when he speaks to the leaders of Japan, France, Spain, Austria, Ireland, Italy, in his discussions with the International Monetary Fund and the European Union, trying to convince all of them to join in Canada's attacks against Venezuela. Yves Engler has even gone to the extent of analyzing the Prime Minister's press releases. He's found that over the last few years, there are 144 references in Justin Trudeau's news releases, 144 references to Venezuela, compared to 4 mentions of Bolivia, 6 of El Salvador, 31 about Brazil, which is a much larger country. Global Affairs Canada has put out hundreds of statements and tweets about Venezuela over the last 3 years. For example, on August the 17th, our foreign minister openly supported Juan Guaido's call for the establishment of a so-called transitional government in Venezuela. And none of this is new. We all know that Canada had a direct role in the process of Juan Guaido self-declaring himself to be president in January 2019. That came 14 days after Chrystia Freeland, who was then the foreign affairs minister, on a phone call with Guaido. We know about this because Tamara Lawrence of the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute made an access to information request, and she managed to get the somewhat redacted talking points for that conversation, which reveal that with Canada's support, Juan Guaido was invited to deliver a presentation on his self-declaration at the Lima Group National Coordinators meeting. Now, here we have the Canadian foreign minister inviting the self-declared president to make a presentation at an international body which Canada helped found for the overthrow of an elected government of another country. Absolutely bizarre. The Associated Press at the time reported that Canada had a key role in building international diplomatic support for Guaido. The Canadian Press noted that Canadian diplomats had spent months coordinating the plan with the opposition. It goes back even further. The more you look into this, the more you find out. In the fall of 2017, the Trudeau government hired a pro-corporate, pro-Washington ex-diplomat to coordinate this bid to oust the Venezuela's government. Hundreds of thousands of our tax dollars were paid to a guy by the name of Alan Cullum, who was hostile to Hugo Chavez during his time as, guess what? He was the former Canadian ambassador to Venezuela from 2002 to 2005. Remember the first attempted coup. So we've been in it up to our elbows, going back, some 20 years. Now, at this point, we don't know what will happen next in Venezuela. The Trump administration is stepping up its sanctions. It's trying to sabotage the December 6th elections. Ironically, just like the Republicans are trying to do inside their own country. But in spite of that, Trudeau shows no sign of dropping Canada's campaign to overthrow Venezuela's government. As I said, a campaign which is unprecedented in Canadian foreign policy history. There's been some blowback for this campaign. Canada recently lost its bid for a seat on the UN Security Council, something that Mr. Trudeau put a high value on, in part, there are many reasons, but in part because of the blatant hypocrisy of a wealthy imperialist power openly interfering in the internal affairs of Venezuela. Meanwhile, how does the Trudeau government react to human rights violations committed by US-backed governments across the rest of the region? I think most of us here know the answer. Canada says almost nothing about hundreds of killings by the regimes in Haiti, Honduras, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, mostly countries where Canadian-based mining companies have profitable operations. And I don't think that this is a coincidence. Where there's money to be made, where there's no threat to the established capitalist order, Canada is perfectly willing to close its eyes. And for all his talk about democratic elections, Justin Trudeau's Liberals mostly ignore the shocking violations of constitutional rights and democratic rules in countries like Haiti, Brazil, Honduras. What's behind all this? You know, why does Mr. Trudeau have this particular fixation on Venezuela? You know, it's partly Canadian mining operations, material interests, but I think it's also related to sucking up to US imperialism. There's no other word for it. Both under Barack Obama and more recently under Donald Trump, the US government has done its best to overthrow the government of Venezuela, has made this a major point of US foreign policy in this hemisphere, and Canada is trying to curry favor by going along with this, by backing this key foreign policy strategy of US imperialism, in part as a way to be able to say, look, we support you guys, so don't put sanctions on our various industries, don't make us victims of your trade disputes and so forth. Essentially, Canada is doing the dirty work for Donald Trump in order to gain favor with the most reactionary US president in recent history, and a man who may very well soon be out of office. But regardless of who is the president, no matter who is in the White House, this campaign against Venezuela is pretty much certain to continue, and there's no sign that Canada will change its course on Venezuela. And that's something that the peace and solidarity movement has to pay increasing attention to in the period ahead. Now, I'd like to just read out the statement from the Vancouver and District Labor Council, which is one of the more progressive bodies in the trade union movement here in British Columbia. They were unable to send a speaker for this event, but they did send this letter. Thank you for your invitation to the upcoming event, Venezuela and its future, elections on December 6th. This is from President Stefan von Sachowski of the Labor Council. He says the December 6th elections will take place in the ongoing context of struggle for democracy and sovereignty in Venezuela. It is also a context of protracted political struggle. On one side of this struggle stand the supporters of the Bolivarian Revolution. On the other, its opponents who have engaged in a series of attempted coups and are in receipt of political and financial support from foreign governments and entities. Unfortunately, we know that the government of Canada is one such government, having opted for a policy of interference on behalf of the Venezuelan elite and the opposition. This support has included backing the failed coup by Juan Guaido and the imposition of sanctions. These sanctions are a form of economic warfare aimed at toppling Venezuela's democratically elected government, which has nationalized the country's oil industry and invested in housing, education, and social services for its people. As is often the case, the sanctions predominantly hurt the working class and the poor and act as a political support to the opposition, making it even more aggressive. The VDLC continues to call upon the federal government to end the sanctions against Venezuela and promote dialogue and diplomacy rather than economic interference and threats. Venezuela's right to self-determination must be respected, and its people must be allowed to decide their own future through their democratic processes. We stand opposed to any suggestion of military intervention, coups, or anti-democratic coercion of any kind being employed or supported by the government of Canada or others against Venezuela. Our best wishes to the working people of Venezuela for a peaceful, free, and fair election, which will demonstrate their true resolve and allow them to determine their own future. In solidarity, Stefan von Sachowski, President, VDLC. I'll turn it back over to you, Barbara.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we're very proud and happy that VDLC has stepped forward and joined in the solidarity, expressions of solidarity with us, and that they played a role in this meeting. I am remiss, I did not acknowledge our presence on Indigenous territory, at least for those of us speaking from Vancouver. I myself live on territory claimed by the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, and others in the Vancouver area are on the territories of the Musqueam and the Squamish. And we're thankful that we can live and work here, and we support their liberation movements as well. So I don't see many questions. The first question I have is whether Venezuelan citizens will be able to vote in Canada. So those of them who are presently residing, working in Canada, will they be able to vote in the National Assembly elections?
In Venezuela, the only election that goes to the abroad are the elections for president of the Republic of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. This election for the National Assembly only will vote the people that are inside Venezuela. There are not elections in countries outside Venezuela.
Okay, so I thought of, I'll just check again, but I thought of a couple of other questions. Regarding the armed defense of Venezuela, given the extent of the militarization around the Caribbean, around the waters of Venezuela, and then on the land side around Colombia, and with the help, you know, the agreement with NATO, between NATO and Colombia, how is the armed defense of Venezuela carrying on?
Well, the last thing we want is a war in Venezuela. We are for sure that if the U.S. decide to go with this plan, are not North Americans the ones that are going to do it. They will try to do it with the Colombians or with the Brazilians. They already did a move around that way to go. I mean, to go with armed forces into Venezuela. And for example, the Brazilians rejected it, and I am sure that the Colombians will reject it too. I think that the main reason of the Southern Command, the armed forces that are around the Caribbean, that's a threat against Venezuela. They want to scare Venezuelans. They want us to, you know, our army to get scared of that. And Venezuela had a long history of fighting against the powerfuls. The Venezuelans were able to defeat a empire before. Simón Bolívar was the liberator of Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, Brazil, Ecuador, Bolivia, y Panama, that was part of Colombia. And they did it barefoot, fighting against the armies. So that feeling of the Venezuelan that we can against anyone is in our heart. We know that it's not easy to fight against the most powerful country in the world. It won't be easy. But if anything happens, the Venezuelan will go. But we think that that won't happen. I don't think that that will be the way to get into Venezuela. That's why they have been trying to do it from the inside, and they put all the power on the National Assembly. And that's why they don't want another National Assembly. They want to gain time with the sanctions to suffocate Venezuela, because we are having very, very hard times at this moment with the sanctions. But we don't think that will be with gunpowder that they will wipe out Venezuela.
But I'll just mention that in other scenarios, they have not wanted to go in directly. Certainly, they don't want to use ground troops, but they like to get other countries' forces to do it. And have see other people die in the process. And sometimes they bomb places where they have not been able to manipulate the situation. So I think we should continue the solidarity on that front. There's another question here. I know that to handle the changes in Venezuela and of course to deal with the shortage of goods because of the economic measures, that there are local small scale and larger scale efforts at food production and production of other goods going on. And there, some of the production is done by communes. There's a question here. During the Curso en Línea, representatives from the Maizal commune describe how the communes are undertaking the union of communes in Venezuela. They also said that their attempts to provide their products to Venezuelans is a constant battle. Do the communes have political strength nationally as an organization vis-a-vis the elections? And I guess part of that would mean whether, I think part of the intent in the question is to see if the national government is able to support them, and are they arising as a strong enough force to be able to contribute to ensuring democracy in the elections and a vote for the Bolivarian movement.
I'd like Nino Pagliccia to talk about this, and then I can give some more information.
Okay.
Please.
Okay. I think that the first thing maybe is important to realize the nature of the communes. I think this is a very new concept and notion that I think many of us, including myself, sometimes I have difficulties even in conceptualizing what a commune is, what a commune does, and so on. But we have to understand that, first of all, two things. One is that the commune is the doorway, if you wish, towards the socialism of the 21st century that Hugo Chavez envisioned, okay? That is from the grassroots up. So communes are not ruled from the top down. They are really, truly grassroots. As we often talk about, you know, as activists, we talk about grassroots movements. That is it. It's right there. It's happening right there in Venezuela through the communes. And we have to accept that, not in our context, in our capitalist milieu, but we have to understand that how it's happening in Venezuela. So what do they do? Basically, it's a group of local people, individuals, who come together by some common issues that they might have, be it political, be it economical, be it cultural, be it because they are into farming, and they work around that notion of communality that they have. And that's what they come together and what they do. Now, more specifically, in a way that's easy to understand, think of a farming commune. Well, their role is to produce food. There's no other way around it. And that's why they come together, and that's what they do. But you know, a commune around culture is just as valuable in a different context, in a different areas. So we have to understand that every commune has its specific role to play, and it's really valid. And they come together, as I said, because they express the wish to do so, and they work together. So now, in terms of understanding how they fit into this transformation that Venezuela is going through. Venezuela still has a national government, has a governorship, has municipalities, has an assembly, national assembly, and so on. There's still a structure that reflects the traditional old structure, if you wish. But we have to understand that parallel to that, and as the vision that Chavez had, it's the grassroots movement through the communes is also building up. Now, hopefully, and that is the main goal of the socialist transformation, that the communes will replace, in fact, this old structure that's already, that's still in place, okay? So now it's kind of difficult to understand, well, what is the commune and what is the federal government, who runs the elections and so on and so forth. Let's slow down. We cannot take one or the other. This is a transformation that's happening, and we have to understand it, and we have to allow for the time for this major, deep transformation to take place. There are now in Venezuela, about 3,500 communes in place. The goal, I understand, is 8,000 to really become a national communal movement that could, in fact, start making a dent and substituting some of the political decisions that now the national government is doing. So I think let's understand that now we have a transformation going on. It's not one, it's not the other. I think I just heard recently the reminder of Gramsci's dilemma that, you know, what we have now is the end of something and the beginning of another entity. And we, in this gap, that's what we are living now. So let's take that, let's keep that in mind. And this could go on still for a while, but we'll end with that. In terms of the elections, I don't know specifically if the communes are involved. I am sure, and I say that as a personal opinion, that the communes are involved politically. I mentioned culture, farming, resources, whatever. But of course, communes are deeply political groups and political organizations, and they are involved, they are watching, okay? So let's hope that they, at the same time, they have a way of encouraging this transformation politically, especially as we approach December the 6th election for the National Assembly.
Let's have Mr. Acuña give a few words.
Yes, well, I think that Nino said everything that I have to say, but it is important that we understand that the communes are something that are at this moment growing in the middle of something that's still there. I mean, this election we have in next December is for one of the political institutions that are in our system at this moment. We don't know if the communes grow and grow, the changes that the country will have, and probably we won't need a National Assembly, I don't know in how many years, but the change that the communes will do to a country are very, very important. I mean, everything should change. Everything should change if the commune system gets into power in a country.
Okay. So shifting to another topic, I was thinking about the emigration. So I think the head of foreign affairs for Venezuela recently told us in Canada, our movement here, that probably there's something like 2 million people who were leaving Venezuela because of the harsh conditions, the shortage of goods and difficulty getting work and so on. But that recently I've heard by following the Maduro presidency's videos online and telesur broadcasts that some people have been turned away because of the coronavirus. They've been turned out of, some of the Venezuelans have been turned out of Peru, Ecuador, and other places, and have been returning because they need the help that Venezuela can offer them. And so I was just wanted to know about the status of that. Is there a huge refugee crisis still? And if there are more people coming back, is the prospect of more elections a motivating factor for people to return from other countries, Venezuelans to return?
Well, the first, I want you to know that most Venezuelans who immigrate are young people, most of them with studies at the university, many of them. Many of those who work at the industries that closed because the sanctions. Many industries closed. And what people do, they have to go, they have children, they have to work someplace. And they go out and they find work because many of our doctors went out, many of our engineers went out, many of our professional people went out, and they went out because they need a job. I am sure that if things, Venezuela returns to normality, they will come back because their families are there. So it's true, many Venezuelans went out, but they went out just because they need to live, to work. And things in Venezuela went very bad with the sanctions. We were not able to do almost anything. Actually, in a way, those things helped because people were forced to work the land. Venezuela was a very, very rich country. Venezuela, many years ago, we had 6 million Colombians who went to Venezuela. And one thing that I wanted to know is that those Colombians who went to Venezuela, they were also Venezuelans because they got the opportunity to become Venezuelans. When they go out of Venezuela, they are not qualified as Colombian, they are qualified as Venezuelan. So that changes the statistic. And that's why you see the number very, very high. And sometimes one of those people go out of Venezuela and go to Colombia, and you have one count. And then from Colombia, he goes to Ecuador, you have two counts. And then you go from Ecuador to Peru and you have three counts. So one becomes three. And that changes the statistic too. Many of them went back to Venezuela because the coronavirus, and also because they were not well treated in some countries, mainly in Peru, in Colombia, and they went back home, and they were welcome. And we were able to manage the virus very well, but we had too many people coming back from places where the coronavirus is very, very high. Brazil is our neighbor, so they had to come back.
Okay.
And they are welcome.
Another one of the attendees has posted a question for you. Over the past year, the US and imperialists have worked very hard to promote counter-revolutionary sabotage within Venezuela and are escalating the attacks. How well prepared is the revolutionary government for the December elections? And a second part to that, what is the most important action that those who support democracy and sovereignty of Venezuela and the Bolivarian movement in Canada and the US can do to support the elections process in Venezuela?
Well, actually, the only one who could change things in Canada are Canadians. It's not what I say that is important to Canada. The important thing for Canada is what Canadians say. So if something is going to change in Canada, it's because Canadians change things, because you are the taxpayer, the taxpayers, because you are the one who can vote and can, put your own government. We in Venezuela, we believe in elections. We have had so many elections all the time. And in Venezuela, everybody knows this book. Everybody has read the Constitution. By the way, in 1999, I was in the National Constitutional Assembly, and I am one of the writers of this book here. I am proud of that.
Oh, wow.
I am proud of that. My name is here in this book.
Ah.
Yeah, in the back. And sometimes I go and I said this part here, this part I write. That's my pride. And because people know this book, people know the rights, and people talk about the elections, and they won the election. And we have people that are Chavistas and some others that are not Chavistas, but everybody goes to the elections and vote. So we are expecting that these elections in December will change things, even though things are very, very hard, as hard, and I will say harder than in 2050.
Mm-hmm. Well, we hope so, and I think we're expressing here that we really want to help, and we want to mobilize others to help. So I have a question about international solidarity. Venezuela is saying quite clearly that it depends on a certain amount of Venezuela depends on a certain amount of international solidarity to be able to strengthen itself and carry out the Bolivarian project, including the democratic elections. And many people do indeed support Venezuela despite ideological differences. like in the democratic movements and the leftist groups, there are factions of different stripes, but they together express solidarity. I'm sure we can say that among the people attending here. And they do so because they want to defend the people's interests. They are concerned about the well-being of the people in Venezuela and other countries. And we want to see them overcome the present challenges and build a liberated society that provides for all. So does the Venezuela government share that kind of attitude towards solidarity, and does it officially express solidarity for other people's movements and struggles? For example, Palestine, Philippines, Colombia, Syria, Sudan, etc.
Yes, we in Venezuela, we express this solidarity with many countries, and it has been, for example, you see how the Cuban team of the medical team of Cuba is a solidarity team with all the world. Venezuela is part of that team. We with Cuba, we have such a close relation in the solidarity that, for example, the planes of Venezuela are the ones who bring the Cubans to any place when they want to go to help. That's part of our solidarity, and that's expressed in many ways. At this moment, we are having very hard time. So it's not easy, but before, when we had a better economical condition, Venezuela was very pleased with all the countries, even with those countries that are not politically close to Venezuela. President Maduro, we were together at the when we were in the National Assembly in 1999, and then we went together. We were together in the National Assembly for 3 terms, and he is very well concerned of the solidarity that President Chavez built around the world.
Thank you for that. So another question has come in from an attendee, Ali. Thanks to event organizers and speakers. A question for Professor Acuña and Nino. What is your view of the Iran-Venezuela anti-imperialist cooperation? What impact overall does this have on anti-imperialist struggle?
Nino first. Go first.
You're giving him the easy jobs.
Okay. I think in order to touch that specific question, I think we have to go back to the meaning of solidarity, especially when it comes to international solidarity. We've been talking about that. The previous question was, how does Venezuela do or practice international solidarity with Colombians, Philippines, and so on and so forth? Well, this is it. This is also now with Iran. It's the same thing. I mean, we have to understand the meaning of international solidarity before we can say anything or even judge, God forbid. So the real point of international solidarity is to come together because we recognize that we have a common enemy. That's sort of the basic definition of coming together in solidarity. You and I have a common enemy. If we come together, we can beat that enemy. Let's do it. Or I or you have a need And by cooperating, we can fulfill mutually that need. And so we are in solidarity with each other. To me, that's the basic notion of solidarity. Now, when it comes to international diplomacy and whatnot, of course, it gets more tricky. The politics gets into the picture. So, of course, if we try to judge the Venezuelan Iran solidarity in this case, because they have come together helping each other, that's a form of solidarity. Iran is doing a lot. The Iranian government is doing a lot to help Venezuela. Now, is that bad? Is that good? Do I have to make a judgment based on what these two governments are and the politics and so on and so forth? Well, okay. Eventually, we might have to if it comes to a serious and diplomatic and international issues. When it comes to basic of survival, basic fighting anti-imperialism, fighting imperialism, you know, I think that's pretty obvious. We come together and we work together to resolve the issue. There's another subtlety in this international solidarity. We always say, or we like to say, or many of us say that, you know, Venezuela, we want Venezuela to do what Venezuelans want, okay? And so we accept whatever decision. That's what we're talking about. December 6th is a decision that corresponds to Venezuelans. We leave it up to them to decide. Do we agree here in Canada? Who cares? That's not my solidarity. The point is that what we should care about is how do we support Venezuelans? How do we support Venezuela? And which political strategy or tactic will support Venezuela in bringing out what the majority of Venezuelans want, okay? So now, if we apply that to Venezuela, well, you know, we have to apply to Iran. Do we agree with the Iranian government or not? Do we criticize Venezuela for having a relationship with an Iranian government that maybe is not the kind of Iranian government we all want? And so I cannot get into that discussion. Right now, I go to the direct need to fight imperialism, and that's the key issue. I would say the same thing about the US. Do you think, you know, do you think I would, yes, I question everything that comes from the US. That's the empire. But ultimately, you know, hey, US Americans will make their own decision. Too bad if they make the wrong one. But we can only observe that, and we can only have an opinion on that, a political opinion, if you wish. But ultimately, it's their job to do what they want to do. So international solidarity, let's understand what that is, because we are working on that premise. When we work in solidarity with Venezuela, we are using that premise of what international solidarity is, okay? Thank you.
Okay. Look, Venezuela is sitting in the largest oil reserve of the world. Iran is also a country that depends much on oil. And there is one country that at a moment sanctioned very, very hard to Iran several years ago. And Iran found a friend. Venezuela sent tankers with gasoline to Iran many years ago when the sanctions against Iran didn't allow Iran to produce gasoline. Now we are getting tankers from Iran with gasoline because now we cannot produce the gasoline. That's solidarity. Once for you, once for me. And at this moment, for example, all the oil industry of Venezuela was built by the US. Our refineries, all these systems in Venezuela are made in the US, were made in the US. If we cannot buy parts, if we cannot buy spare parts, things get stuck. Well, we are trying to be help for friends in solidarity, and Iran is helping Venezuela to try to rebuild our refineries to produce gas, gasoline, or other parts. The relation between Iran and Venezuela in this moment is because we have a common enemy, I will say, that is the US. And we have to join our efforts to protect each other. That's solidarity.
All right, I think we'll just do one last question and then let you go. I know it's getting late in central Canada. So about the indigenous people in Venezuela, which I don't hear very much about. So I wanted to ask about their involvement or support for the political process in Venezuela and for the communes as well. Are they active as a separate movement with their separate claims, or are they part of the People's General Mass movement? And are they contributors to supporting the Bolivarian party?
Well, in Venezuela, the indigenous people are we have about 43, 45 different indigenous tribes, I would say, people with different language and customs in Venezuela. They were able to work in this constitution, and this constitution has one of the most advanced rights for the indigenous people in the world. This is an example for many of the Canadian indigenous that during the time they were working with our people in Venezuela, you know, for the indigenous people of one country and another country, they usually meet, and they were working very hard on that. And for example, in the National Assembly, the indigenous people elect their own people with their own rules, and they go, I mean, I don't vote for that, for the person they select to go to the National Assembly. They only the indigenous people select that ones, and they have the right to elect a number of indigenous people into the National Assembly, independently of what happens. They have many rights, very important, and they are very well considered in Venezuela. And the rights in the constitutions are very important, and the laws they were able to write for their rights are very important.
All right, everybody. I think it's been a very good discussion today, and a very good coming together of all of us to hear our featured speaker. We thank Luis Acuña for making his time available at such a time in the evening. This has been very informative. I think it's a contribution to building solidarity as well as understanding what's going on in Venezuela, what are the challenges of the Venezuelan people, and the importance of the upcoming National Assembly elections on December 6th. So I think probably I can safely say that all of us who have participated today anyway, wish you well and or wish the Bolivarian movement well in the upcoming elections, and we will continue to express solidarity. We, the Venezuela Peace and Solidarity Committee, hope to have further discussions with representatives of the Bolivarian movement in the next few months. So we look forward to another such experience. Thanks, everybody, and good night.
Venceremos.
Thank you to Kimball for his help in setting up this. Okay, venceremos.
Gracias, profesora Acuña.
Gracias a ustedes. Gracias.
Gracias.